The young people are embracing the vision of their leader, and they're going forward to participate and not become the critics of their government, but become the agents of change within a conducive government environment. I think Burkina Faso and the Sahel states are going to be the leaders into the new Africa that we want. My trip to Burkina Faso was very exciting. This is about the third or fourth time I go there, and I was welcomed greatly by the captain and the team there. And what we witnessed is a country that is under construction. We were privileged enough to be taken to some of the training institutions where they are teaching IT. We saw some military, what they call it, public service for the young people who are being moved away from the streets to become assets in the government. And one very funny story that I read, this one I didn't see it, but I read it on the media, where one young man, a doctor, got up on Facebook and he was telling Traoré how much he is failing to fix the issue of terrorists in the country. And he lambasted the president. And the president was very smart. He sent out his intelligence and they found the young man and they brought him to the camp, took him to the military barrack, and they trained him and they gave him a gun. And they sent him and says, go and do what go and do what you said we are failing to do. Now he's a whole medical doctor now at the military front. But I think with the humor of that, you begin to see that it's not just about talking. But what I loved most is the merge of government policy and activities that are happening with the young people. So the government says and places an embargo. No more fresh tomatoes are going to be exported out of Burkina Faso. Now imagine the frustration with all the business people that have been sending tomatoes to Ghana, to Togo, and etc. And we woke up in the morning and no more tomatoes are leaving Burkina Faso. But Ibrahim Traoré, being a military guy, the manufacturing plants are already here. The processing plants are already here. The drying plants are already here. The farmers are over here. The implements are over there. The transportation is there. Now look at that whole entire value chain as it begins to respond to the decision that you make in the government. And I think maybe in many of our African governments, that's the problem, where the decisions that we make in terms of our policy design and implementation and the literal activities that then meet up with that, you always find that they are moving away from each other instead of consolidating themselves into a common visions. Similarly so, even on the fish farms that are happening there, beautiful, fresh, tasty fish that you find there, it's all being done locally. And while we were there in Bobo Dioulasso, what was nice also, they have a cultural village. I actually had a vision for Africa, a cultural village, where all the various cultures of Burkina Faso, each one of them had a booth of their own culture and their own activities. And just when I thought I'd seen it all, the neighboring countries, which are at the border of Burkina Faso, whose cultures are on both sides of the border, also came. So Ghana was there, Togo was there, and Mali was there. And this, it just created the dances that were happening there, the drums. You don't have to wait for the other people to finish playing their drums. These ones are playing, these ones are playing. And you are in this whole atmosphere of African celebration. I thought that was magical. And for celebrations such as Africa Unity Day here, it would have been nice to actually begin to talk about African cultural integration and celebration. So Burkina Faso is my second home. I had the privilege of being given permanent residence in Burkina Faso, and I look forward to contributing meaningfully towards the development of that country. My trip to China, and I spend all my life is traveling, it's learning, and getting to understand the continent in relation to the international community. So the interruption of parasites and colonialists can also be attributed to that. That instead of us continuing the trajectory of our development, how we wanted it to be, we actually pushed off course to move towards the colonial development, which is bringing solutions to us. And in some certain cases, we don't even need those solutions and they're not practical to our needs. So I compare those two, where a nation is building itself from itself, and Ibrahim is importing materials importing machinery to develop the community. China is manufacturing those machineries. And I think on those two illustrations, the African leader can begin to see how best do you want to create and produce and develop your country to be. Do you want to start beneficiating your raw materials? Do you want to start building manufacturing industries? But how do these value chains work to speak to your national development strategy, involving your young people and your entire community, and allow the people to buy into your vision? Don't walk around like a tourist when you're a leader, all by yourself. You're the only one with a vision of where the country must go. Come on, stop a little bit and come back and address us. Talk to us. Let us buy into your vision and let us work together. China gives us a model of how in 30 years you can transform a country from a third world to become a first world. Yeah, and I think it's within our hands to do that. China had to break rules and laws to be where they are. And the visit of Trump to China, in my own assessment, it is rather complex because one, American companies took their IPs and took their products into China for the past 30 years to help them to do the manufacturing. Why? Because Chinese labor is cheaper. It was convenient for the companies to take their products there. So while the Chinese are producing Apple, they started learning how to produce Samsung. They started learning how to produce Huawei. They started learning how to do redo and other fake, whatever you call it. But they perfected their fakeness until their brands are now competing pound for pound with the American products. And we saw it in the last few months. And I think the American and the European companies have been working very hard to delete as many of those videos as possible on social media. But about 3-4 months ago, if you remember, even 5 months ago, if you remember very well, the Chinese went on a rampage to show the world that the brands that you are paying around the world for 5,000, 10,000, the Gucci's, the Armani's, the Hennessy bags, the what, they're actually costing $5 or $10, $15. And what a shame to our African brothers and sisters who thought that they would be showing around town with expensive bags. Now we know the true value is just a tag that is put in Europe, but the manufacturing is happening over there. And I think Trump saw the threat that their brands were now facing in front of China. They needed to speak to China and find a middle ground. But not only for the business community, but also for sovereignty and power. It's a power game. Now China is coming up as a first world. It is a first world and is also a superpower. They have nuclear, they have guns, they have numbers, they have population. America has only 289 million people. China is 1.3, 1.4 billion people. So by all means and by all practical purposes, America cannot even be trying to compete to become a superpower except for war. China has the numbers, and now that they have the weapons and they have the GDP that can challenge their bonds, the American companies and American government has been running on Chinese money for the longest of time in terms of national bonds. And when the wars are beginning to break around the world and the Chinese are beginning to tighten up their hands, calling their money back and etc., America can feel the pinch. And it is true, it cannot be ignored, that China can drop American economy overnight. But it's not good for China because when you kill competition, you also kill the market. They still need a market where they can sell their products. So I think looking for each other. Trump is, maybe the question is Trump looking for Jinping or is Jinping looking for Trump? But in international diplomacy, we know Trump has been calling African leaders like village boys. Come to Washington. I mean, Ramaphosa was called the other day. Come. Kagame was called the other day. Come. And all these African presidents must go and meet the boss and be told what he thinks about their country and Tinubu, But on this time around, we see Donald Trump packing up 20 or 30 of his top businessmen in the country, loading himself on an aeroplane and going to China to meet Xi Jinping. Now, that's power. If you understand international diplomacy, you are coming to me because you need business with me. If I need business with you, I will come over there. And of course, there's been a tradition in the American government that every sitting American president has to go to China. But it's only Biden who had broken that code. But Trump has resuscitated that international diplomatic visit to visit China. And the relationship of China and America is important, because the conflict of those two countries and their confrontation could actually be a precipitating factor to World War III. So they need to find each other's interests. And of interest to us, it is the interest of America in Iran and the interest of China in Iran, and how those interests are beginning to be spoken away from Iran. This is colonization on steroids. When two people are discussing your country in your absence, they're agreeing, they're making treaties on how to treat you without you. If I was China, I would have invited Iran to be part of that conversation. Because that's how Berlin Conference happened, that our enemies set by themselves to discuss us without us. So, but the outcomes of those decisions have impacted us all. So, yes, China, interesting, and how funny and exciting to note that is when Trump is landing in America, before he even finishes unpacking his bags, that our honorable Putin walks on the scene into Beijing to meet up with Xi Jinping, and after a post-mortem discussion as to find out exactly what, but I can almost guess the conversations there mostly are around Iran and the stopping of that war. The problem of Trump is that he talks too much. He's a waffler. He's a loose mouth. He cannot say anything, Trump, because Trump controls nothing. Trump is an employee of the deep state. Trump is an employee of the multinational companies, the gun manufacturing companies, the bomb manufacturing companies, who are actually the lobbyists who put presidents into power and remove them out of power. And those people, they make money from war. So Trump cannot say that I'm not going to do war when the very people that have put him into power are selling weapons and selling bombs and selling grenades and etc. Impossible. So they needed to empty their stocks in the Middle East so that they can restockpile in the American government. It's a business transaction. So you bomb all your stations in Middle East. Then you walk back to Parliament and say, we have lost equipment. And the Parliament must approve money. The Department of Defense must make the money. They'll sign up the contracts with the manufacturers, and business goes on as usual. And Trump being a contractor himself, I'm not mixing my words. The embassies that are bombed, buildings that are bombed, that belong to America, and etc., they are contracts that are now being signed up. Who is going to repair those buildings? Who is going to build those buildings? New ones. The whole of Gaza and Israel that has been destroyed. New contracts are coming up in Tel Aviv to rebuild Tel Aviv. And those who are doing construction are going to make money. So war is creating business. So Trump cannot be talking about, I'm not going to go to war. He's not in control of himself. The army is being controlled elsewhere. When it comes to the issue of Iran, however, Trump undermines something very important, that Iran is not a new kingdom. This is Assyria. As a theologian, this is an ancient civilization. Way before America even knew where its toothbrush and underwears were. The Babylonians, the Assyrians have been there, and the Persians, the Turkeys. These are not empires. They've seen kingdoms come and go. And you cannot wake up one morning as a 200-year-old boy, America, and think that you're going to delete a history that has been here for thousands of years. And I think he undermined his power. He overestimated his intelligence, having looked at Afghanistan, having been to Venezuela, having bullied Cuba, having been to Nigeria, having been to Iraq a few years earlier on, having struggled with Russia and Ukraine. He thought maybe Iran was a walk in the park. And to his embarrassment, he discovered that those people have been preparing this war for the past 20, 30 years. They knew it was coming. And the Strait of Hormuz, the cables that are going through there, the militarization of the Strait of Hormuz cripples down almost 20% of world trade in terms of oil. And whether this was intentional or not, it's another story. But we know now that most of that oil that was going through there was going to China. And China was one of the biggest users of that corridor. And America starting war with Iran over the Strait of Hormuz can almost tell you why. You want to slow down the production that is happening in China through restrictions of oil imports. And you are in Kenya here. You can feel the impact of the wars of Hamas. And some of our young people out there who are less educated will always come on our platforms like this and say, Maponga, shut up. Talking about America, talking about Europe. Fix your country. Stop talking about global politics until you go to the garage. Then you find out what is happening in Iraq, what's happening in Iran has a direct impact with what is happening in your petrol tank, in your own house. So yes, we need to keep our eyes on the global political terrain, because whatever is happening out there has a way of coming to affect exactly what is happening to us. But the war between Iran and America is precipitated by Israel. Israel is the notorious boy. Israel is America in the Middle East. Classically, Israel is America in the Middle East. And of interest to us, as observers and as watchers of time, it is to see the impeccable timing between the Epstein files, the Iran war, and the Israeli involvement. And to understand that actually Epstein is a Jew, is an Israeli, is a Mossad, who has kept files for 3 to 4 presidents, who has kept files of all the top people in America and some of Europe to blackmail them for such things. So we don't even know whether going to war with Iran was trying to divert the community and the entire world away from the Epstein files, which are still pending, by the way. But in the last few weeks, we seem to see lots of media management. But we know it's a simmering pot that must be attended to. And Israel has been blackmailing American presidents for the longest of time to be doing this. But I need someone to be very clear about Israel. Israel is working with the Bible, the Torah. And the Torah gives the Israelis, oh, watch this one. It gives them the territory from the Nile to the Euphrates. Now, I put a document out there that day. Please go on my page, Farmers of Thought, and Google for that document. The map of the land that God, Yahweh, gave the Israelites starts at the mouth of the Nile, here in Uganda and Congo, and stretches all the way to the tip of Turkey, through Ethiopia, through Sudan, through Yemen, through Iraq, through Iran, and according to the promise that they were given, this is all their land. And no one will tell them that because their God says so. This is when the religion becomes a weapon of war. So when they are talking about Israeli war of Gaza and etc., the expansion of Israel, it's not like they were going to take Gaza and stop. No. It was get Gaza in, get Iran in, get Yemen in, come to Africa, get Ethiopia in. So even the arrival of the 500 Israelis that are here, they are now in Kisumu, here in Kenya. I wonder if you understand the mindset of the Zionists. Why are they here? Because they, according to them, even Kenya and Uganda belongs to them because their Bible and their God gave them the land between the Nile and the Euphrates. So you are all supposed to be working for the Jews. You are the Gentiles who are mentioned in the Bible, and they are supposed to be lords and kings over you. And I wonder if people understand that theology and religion is actually a recruiting ground for Zionism. And their agenda as Zionists has nothing to do with helping Africans. In fact, they were telling, you can go and Google what they say about Africans. But if it was according to them, all Africans must be working for themselves, for the Jews.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more